We are back on It's Always Game Day in Cincinnati. Lindsay Patterson, Mike Santagata. We are working hard during your bye week. Mike, how are you?
I'm doing pretty good. There's a current trend on TikTok that I love, which is weird. It's a weird mashup of the song Scott Pilgrim versus My GPA from Mom Jeans with sports players. And these things have like 100,000 likes. And I never expected those two things to come together. But I love that song, love the clips. So I'm glad they still going. Saw one with Kemba Walker, haven't seen any Bengals to make it podcast related yet. Somebody
Mhm.
get on that. You could do some good ones, but it's great. It's just like players who recently ish retired and a nice highlight video. What have you been up to during the bye week?
You know what? It's snowing in Cincinnati today. And, we rarely get that snow in November before December gets here. And I love everything about it. I'm here for it. Bring on winter. And I say that because I work from home, so I don't have to travel in it. If I traveled in it, I would hate it. Just hanging out. Big weekend coming up with Thanksgiving. Excited to enjoy some football without any stress related feeling when I watch the game. But yeah, I kind of like the buy at this time. I think the Bengals could have benefited from the buy a couple weeks ago, but I like it right now.
Yeah, I mean, at the same time, maybe last week. I was thinking, like, when can you get Orlando Brown back? I guess two
Yeah.
weeks ago, you would at least have a game where you played with T. Higgins and didn't have to play without him. But also, in that game against the Ravens, the offense wasn't an issue. I don't know. Because, like, the bye week, I mean, it's essentially is a bye week for, like, Orlando Brown and when he's missing time, right? I mean, I guess he's getting some limited practices in there, but I don't think it would magically heal him up faster. Uh, yeah. Other than that, I hate the cold. I work from home now, and I still hate the cold. I despise it. I hate the feeling of being cold so much. There is a space heater up here, but I haven't ran it yet because the heat doesn't really reach up here that well, even though heat rises. But yeah, I hate the cold. So I'm glad somebody gets to enjoy this. I used to work outside for five
Yeah.
years, 6 years actually. So that was where it started, but I still hate it.
It's funny because we both live in areas where it gets cold every year. We have seasons. But no, it's yeah, it feels like football weather. I'm excited for Thursday night football tonight. We get a little AFC North action between the Browns and the Steelers. As we're recording this, we're recording on a Thursday evening. We decided it is bye week. We've talked plenty. We vented on the show. I feel like our Tuesday pods are normally venting, or Wednesday morning when you listen to them. Just kind of how the season has gone. It hasn't gone great. Mike and I've talked about it before. Season is over. They have like a 13% chance of making the playoffs. And I'm not buying in until they win like four in a row. And then maybe I'll jump back on looking at the playoff picture. They have a huge one when they get back to work next week against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Jermaine Pratt is predicting a win. It's
It would
crazy.
be crazy. It'd be so funny if Jermaine Burton was predicting a win.
Could you imagine? You,
Wow, you got money on it, Jermaine?
you know what?
Yeah,
So
yeah. I saw that Jermaine Pratt. He
this
did
is where
that.
we're at.
He did that once before, I think, and they got stomped by the Ravens. So I'm hoping this one goes better.
Yeah. What else can you do? Maybe it works. Maybe it works to give yourself some confidence on the defensive side, but that's where the Cincinnati Bengals are. We'll talk more about the matchup next week. They'll get back to practice and a little bit of their first matchup against the Pittsburgh Steelers. But first, we decided to do a little mailbag. It has been a minute. I think the last time we had a mailbag was over the summer leading up to football season. So thank you so much. Make sure you're following Mike over on Twitter, Bengals_Sands. You can follow me at LNDS Patterson. Spencer, let's get to our mailbag questions. What letter grade would you give the Bengals on the season and why?
I mean, the only options here are F or D. Uh,
Yeah.
for me, I'm gonna go D, and my only reasoning for that is that they're not. They are in the games. They're one score games. So I think an F for me would be like they came out and the offense also wasn't good, and they're just like getting curb stomped to the point where like you don't even have hope for next year. Or you're like, oh, this team really stinks. Right now, I think you could say like this team's not as good as we thought, but it's also not a bad team. They're beating bad teams. They're not losing to the bad teams, at least after the week one. So I'm going D. Maybe I'm too nice. What do you think?
I'm gonna go D plus.
Oh, I
And
was closer to D minus.
the only reason I want to go D plus is because It's the offense. I mean, it's just the way Joe Burrow's playing. It's absolutely crazy when you see what Trey Hendrickson is leading compared to the other defensive players in the league when it comes to sacks. He's breaking records for the Bengals. And then you have Jamar Chase probably going to win Triple Crown. Yeah, Joe Burrow out there breaking all the records he can possibly break, being number one in almost every category. And this team is where it's at. And I'm so disappointed. I agree with you. They've been in every game. I would say every game except for the Eagles. And it's so hard for me to say they were in the Patriots game because that felt like a sleepwalk. That was so crazy if you think about it. And imagine having week one back right now where you're at in the season. It would be a huge difference maker. It feels like having 5 wins versus 4 right now, just because the way the outlook is looking for the next 6. So for me personally, I'm going D plus, and that's mostly just because of Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase playing out of their mind. But yeah, none of it's good. It's terrible. And I want to just add one more thing to it. I know we've talked about it before. Look, it sounds silly to say this because they're a 4-7 team, but when you look around the league outside of the Detroit Lions, it is so disappointing to see what the Bengals are doing this year compared to some of these rosters, because you think, man, if they were in the playoffs, this team they could do something if they had an average defense, because I believe in the way their offense is playing. They're putting up over 30 points a game. It's been absolutely incredible. And that's been without T for most of those games. So I don't know. I guess I'm just disappointed. D plus.
Yeah. Oh, closer to a D minus for me. I mean, compared to what I thought they'd be, this is a failure.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a huge offseason coming up, and we'll see what happens in the next game. What is our next Twitter mailbag question? Mike Gesicki played 51 snaps last Sunday night. What exactly did he do?
Cardio. a lot of running. He got 2 targets. I mean, he chips a little bit. He'll be there on some run plays because you have to, but like from what I remember, he was mostly running routes. He just wasn't targeted. And I think that comes from just the design, like the offense was running itself through the 2 stars, and there's no need to force the ball to Gesicki in those situations. I think the only thing that doesn't make sense to me, and never makes sense to me, is that Tanner Hudson takes the field on goal line situations and runs routes that get targeted instead of Gesicki, where I'm like, well, why doesn't Mike get those opportunities? Because he's a better player. Don't exactly know. Still don't know what Tanner Hudson does better than Mike to get out there in those situations. But yeah, he was out there. I mean, Hudson only had 9 snaps. It's just that he got targeted on 2 of them, and they were 2 important plays. I don't know. I don't really understand it, but he's out there.
Yeah, I agree. It is. It's those things when you see Joe going to Tanner Hudson, you're like, well, what are you doing? There's other options, and it's Tanner Hudson who is. It feels like he's getting the ball more than what he is over the last few games, and maybe that's just kind of how the Ravens game ended, and it was going to go to Tanner Hudson, which a lot of people are questioning. That one could have went to Jamar Chase possibly, but yeah, I think with Mike Gesicki overall with this season, he's I would say exceeded my expectations so far with this offense. I know that sounds crazy because his numbers aren't super amazing or anything like that, but it was a 1-year deal, and it just kind of felt like, oh, we'll see what happens. And maybe my expectations were a little bit lower because of what happened with Irv Smith the year prior. And I thought, oh yeah, Irv Smith is going to come into this offense and be one of the best tight ends for Joe Burrow. I was wrong. I will admit that was a terrible take, and I've had plenty. But Mike Gesicki, I truly feel like he's somebody that you really have to look at in the offseason as maybe adding another year if he will come back to the Cincinnati Bengals, because I think he's a reliable target for Joe Burrow. There are several games this season where when T has been out that you think, oh, use him as that slot wide receiver, even though he's a tight end. And with T Higgins more than likely walking and going to another team, I think it would just be smart to bring a target who had 1 year with Joe Burrow. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. Gesicki's really a wide receiver. He's a role player, and he plays a useful role. It seems like they only unlock it whenever Higgins is out, and I don't really understand that because Higgins doesn't really play in the slot much. So it's kind of weird, but I guess when they do like 3-by-1 formations, Higgins is usually the backside one, or they want Chase to be that guy. So maybe that takes away from some of what they want to do, because that's some places that Gesicki gets his targets. But it just feels bizarre that they can't figure out how to get those 2 to work together in the same game. But yeah, I'm open to him coming back. And the thing about Gesicki is he's probably not going to command a high number because we're saying he's having a better than expected season, but it's not like he's out there. He's going to cross 800 yards or something. That's going to make you really pay out the butt for him. I think he's going to get an okay contract. And if that's the Bengals, like $5 million or something, I'm okay with that. It's fine. It's getting a role player. It's getting a guy you know, and it doesn't preclude you from drafting a tight end if you love a guy, or if a free agency tight end comes in and blows you away and you really want them. I don't think it stops you there either because you can find a spot for him. But he's a useful player just in case none of that happens.
Yeah. All right. Next mailbag question. How would you feel about bringing in Bill Belichick as the head coach and keeping Dan Pitcher as the OC? I will say this yesterday. I think people took it the wrong way. I had put it out on social media, Mike. It is the bye week, so there's all kinds of just topics going out on social media. There was the Joe Mixon topic, obviously, because Monday Night Football happened, and good for Joe, what he's doing with the Texans. And then the next day it was Bill Belichick to the Bengals. And I thought, wow, what's the topic going to be the next day? And it just seemed to really hit it off on social media. Everybody's ready to fire Zach Taylor and bring in Bill Belichick. And I said, I do not see that happening. We'll get to Dan Pitcher in just a moment. But what do you think about that?
I feel like this is so unlikely it's not worth talking about.
I'm totally fine with that.
If Bill Belichick, there's probably like a 1% chance, if not less, that Bill Belichick would even take this job. He's the greatest coach of all time. There's no real reason for him to push for this job. Maybe he wants to. I've seen some people say, oh, he's got a good relationship with the Brown family. Got to be a real good relationship with this Brown family. Maybe they give him the GM duties because he's going to want the GM role as well, which they don't have an actual GM. So I guess that could work in theory. But he's not keeping Pitcher. And he's going to bring in all of his friends. Like that is the Bill Belichick. He's going to bring in Josh McDaniels to run this offense. Matt Patricia is going to be the defensive coordinator. And it's going to be what the late stage Patriots were, because he's not really out there looking to prove anything to me. He's done it all. He's won 6 Super Bowls. He's won more than 6 Super Bowls if you count his time as a defensive coordinator. And I don't, people complain about this offense now, and I'm just imagining it with like Josh McDaniels and a little bit more outdated. It's like, yeah, you're really going to complain. Like, you think it's bad now. I mean, I guess some people want it to go back, but I don't see this helping the offense. I think it would help the defense. He's still a great defensive mind. I don't think he's outdated as a defensive mind. I think what he did with the Patriots last year was really good. He did the Patriots the year before was very good. I think the defense was always good. Special teams will be better if they'd hire him, but it's not going to come with keeping Dan Pitcher or really any assistant. I think he's just going to hire in all of his children and friends to run the team. That's what you get with Bill Belichick. That's kind of the package deal. And I think it's also why the Falcons said no. They're like, well, we don't want Josh McDaniels as an offensive coordinator. And we don't want Steve Belichick as our defensive coordinator or Matt Patricia as defensive coordinator. Like, we want you, but we don't want what comes with it. And that's what it is. He doesn't bring Scarnecchia either. I've seen someone mention, like, yeah, Scarnecchia might be one of the greatest offensive line coaches of all time. He's been retired for like 5 years. Like, he's not coming out of retirement. The guy's like 80 something. It'll be whoever. It'll probably be one of his other children that's playing the offensive line coach. No, I mean, it'll probably be a real offensive line coach, but like, it's not going to come with the great offensive line coach that he had during his prime and all. I just don't see any of that. Maybe Dean Pease would be your best assistant that you could get out of this as a defensive coordinator, or Bill O'Brien. You'd be rooting for Bill O'Brien to be your offensive coordinator instead of Josh McDaniels. Is that what you want?
No, I'm going to say this about the whole situation. Look, maybe it's my mindset of being realistic about this whole entire situation when everybody's ready to fire Zach Taylor. I do not think the Cincinnati Bengals are going to fire Zach Taylor after the season. I think he's going to be the head coach. If they lose every game from here on out, or maybe only win one more, maybe that's a topic of discussion and it happens. And yes, I know other organizations would have said, we're done, we're moving on. That other organizations operate different than the Cincinnati Bengals. I feel like we know that. I'm not saying it's okay to just accept where they're at when it comes to situational coaching, not being able to finish games, not getting the calls in on time, having the struggles that they do have on all sides of the ball. And I'm not really trying to put the offense too much into that because they have performed this season, but they don't have a run game. You can look at Frank Pollock when it comes to the offensive line and the run game coordinator. There's a lot of issues internally. And yes, at the end of the day, it should come down to the head coach. And even Zach Taylor said that in his media presser this week. It comes down to me. So I just don't think that they're going to move on from Zach Taylor. But if they were, I will say this, and I'll give credit to Joe Goodberry because I'm on his subscriber Twitter stuff. It's actually really good. I think all Bengals fans should do it. It's $5 a month, and he puts really great content out there. And one of the things he talked about yesterday was like, oh, let's talk about this then, because it was a topic of conversation. He brought in the possibility of more, and you mentioned it, the defense would be better with Bill Belichick, another defensive mind coach as the head coach. Because if you think about Joe Burrow early on, and I think a lot of people have said, oh, yeah, get that offensive mind. Zach Taylor, he's a former quarterback coach, and and not a whole lot of people were sold on Zach Taylor because he didn't have that head coach resume. But you think offensive mind when you think about that rookie quarterback or the quarterback coming into the NFL. Joe Burrow could probably handle this offense with him and an offensive coordinator. And then you flip on a defensive coach, helps with the defensive side, but also situational coaching. And maybe that would be helpful. Maybe this team would benefit from a defensive mind as a head coach.
I think my issue when you mention situational is I usually find defensive coordinator or defensive minded head coaches to be pretty conservative. And I'd rather have a guy be aggressive in the situation. It doesn't mean that's 100% what would happen. But when I think about it, like the most conservative coach right now is the Raiders head coach Antonio Pierce, who was a defensive mind, they're punting from like the 38 at times on 4th and 1. Like that is something that would drive me crazy.
And Joe did mention the aggressiveness of the difference between, if you do bring in a difference of coordinator. So I'm just kind of throwing in their overall picture because that's their issue right now. It's the situational stuff. The Bengals have been more aggressive this year, which I feel like they've had to be in a lot of situations. But he kind of just brought up a defensive mind on the defense side because honestly, Joe Burrow would probably be fine on offense. He'd be going into year 6 and you would have possibly Dan Pitcher would be the offensive coordinator. And I don't know, it's kind of a different way to look at it because I've always been sold on offense when I think about Joe Burrow and this team. But at the end of the day, if the right guy.
I think it works either way. But yeah, I don't really care about which side of the ball it would come from, to be honest. I just think I worry about the aggressiveness. Like whenever you do your interviews with a defensive minded head coach, you have to talk to them a lot about like, how do you feel about going for it on 4th down and different situations? And how do you feel about trying to score with 30 seconds left and 2 timeouts before the half or 1 timeout before the half? Because you just don't want to be in a situation where you have an elite quarterback and you're passing up opportunities that you could score.
At the end of the day, I don't think the Bengals are making a change with their head coach.
Yeah. True.
I really don't. And I'm not saying that it's right or wrong right now. I'm just saying I think they have a lot of conversations they need to make when it comes to a lot of coaches in the room. We could talk about Lou in a room all day. Some of his D-line coaches, the secondary coaches, the offensive line. There's plenty of other coaches that I do think we could see that change towards the end of the season. You honestly better see that change at the end of the season. But for me personally, Bengals are probably going to ride with these guys until the end of the season, and then we'll see. But I should never say never. I guess it could possibly happen, but I just don't see Bill Belichick coming to Cincinnati.
Either, and it definitely won't happen with Pitcher staying.
And I want Dan Pitcher to be here.
Yeah, I like Pitch.
I think he's
next question.
Next question.
Don't want to hang on it too long.
Yeah. Who or what is to blame for the Bengals' 10-year stretch of awful offensive line signings and D-line?
Okay, I take issue. It was only like 4 years ago that they signed DJ Reader and Trey Hendrickson. I just think it's a mixed bag. Like, it's not, I wouldn't say awful. Especially signings. I mean, some of the offensive linemen they've signed, are bad. Bobby Hart, they knew he was bad. At least I think they knew he wasn't great. And they just didn't think there was something better. I don't know. That was just being cheap. Some of it's being cheap. Like when you talk about signings, like free agent signings, if you're talking about letting guys leave too, I think that comes into them being probably a little bit too confident in their abilities to find replacement for high-end red chip players, like I talked about a while ago. But yeah, I think there's somewhat of a evaluation concern with how they view edges because they only want guys that are 270 pounds. And whenever we get to draft season, as long as Duke Tobin's here, I don't I just don't even bother thinking about some of these guys that are like twitched up, but they're 230, 240 pounds as edge rushers. They're not interested. They're interested in guys that can move mountains. Um, so it really limits them, I think, too. But that's more of a draft thing than it is a signing thing to me. I don't know. I don't consider it awful. I consider it bad luck, and they play with one hand tied behind their back because they don't give out big contracts to guards or interior offensive linemen, and they also don't give out a lot of guaranteed money. They also signed Orlando Brown recently. That's a good signing. So
Yeah.
Kappa was a good signing, and Karras was a good signing when they did it.
Yeah.
Kappa, especially his first 2 years, I think that ankle injury really hurt his career. And then you get things like Lyle Collins that didn't work, but I think it's just a mixed bag. I wouldn't consider it awful. So they're probably, to me, like middle of the pack when it comes to these signings.
Here's what I have a problem with, and I feel like it's been their mindset for 10 years when it comes to interior offensive line. I remember when, and I was fine. They let Andrew Whitworth go. Honestly, I was like, okay, I guess I get it because people forget they did extend Andrew a couple times when he was in Cincinnati, but they decided, hey, we're gonna bet on, which was a terrible plan and it didn't work out. And believe me, I would have rather Andrew Whitworth still retire in Cincinnati. That would have been amazing. The Bengals decided, hey, we're gonna move on. It happened. Andrew won that because he got more money and he won a Super Bowl. Interiors were what really bothers me. And I know you mentioned Kappa and Karras, and then obviously Cordell Volson. It just really hasn't felt like it has worked out. But overall, I remember when Witt left, it almost felt like, okay, well, they're going to put that money towards Kevin Zeitler. And it honestly
Yeah.
feels like such a domino effect because we still do that with signings today. Oh, they didn't pay Jesse Bates, they're going to pay this guy. Or they didn't pay this guy, they're going to pay this guy. And I always kind of thought that they were going to do that with Kevin Zeitler, but they've never wanted to put a lot of money into the interior. They just don't value interior as much as they do the tackle position. Not saying that they've brought in amazing tackles, but when it comes to opening their checkbook, interior's been where they just haven't overspent a lot of money. And I always thought, okay, well, Kevin left and he's had this amazing career. He's with the Detroit Lions right now. They had opportunities to bring Kevin Zeitler back. He went to other teams. He went to Cleveland, then he went to the Giants, then he went to the Ravens, and then he's with the Lions. And I
The
always kind of
Browns.
just wanted them to bring him back at one point, and they just never did. And I think that was one of their bigger mistakes when it comes to the interior, and that has really bothered me. I agree with you on some of the free agent signings. DJ Reader, Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson's their best free agent signing in my lifetime. Absolutely paid off for them. But offensively, I just feel like the interior is where it really bothers me with how the front office operates. And they have an opportunity. And look, I know it probably won't happen because he's going to be extended in Kansas City. A guy they missed in the draft, Trey Smith, who a lot of teams missed in the draft, is up for an extension. We'll see if he stays in Kansas City. What will the Cincinnati Bengals do in interior? I think that they're going to move on from Kappa. I think you need one of your guards going into the offseason. And that's really where it bothers me the most is the value when it comes to interior players.
Yeah, I think the other one is that Joe Tooney wasn't opposed to coming here, but they didn't put out a competitive offer. From what I heard, Teron Armstead wasn't opposed to coming here. They didn't put out a competitive offer. And you think about what those guys could have done because those aren't run of the mill like those are elite talents. I know Armstead will miss some time, but Tooney, there's a lot of talk about like how something could have worked in that Super Bowl. I think Tooney is the guy that it would have worked with if they were willing to open up their checkbooks. Maybe you miss out on Trey Waynes, hopefully just Trey Waynes, because it would probably cost the same as it cost for him, or maybe just a little bit more. And then you've got a really competent offensive line. Not really, but you have a more competent offensive line. You have a guy that's actually held his own against Aaron Donald when they've faced. So, yeah, I think that's a big one. They don't value guard. They don't value red chip players that are playing just below the elite level. You can see that with T, Bates, Reader, Zeitler in the past, Justin Smith. It's just like if they're not a top 3-4 guy at their position, they don't value them the same way they should, in my opinion, when you're just like a top 10 guy, a top 12 guy at your position. It's like you're very good, but you're not elite. And they should value those guys more because when you hit on those in the draft, That is a hit. That is a triple. Maybe you didn't hit a home run, but you hit a triple, depending on where they got taken. So yeah, they should have re-signed Zeitler. I think that was a big whiff. I think everybody knew it was kind of happening, even though it didn't make sense. It's like, oh, they don't value guards. It's like, okay, but what if they did? Whatever. I think Trey Smith might hit free agency, and I don't know if the Bengals are interested because it's going to cost too much money. They'll be looking at Will Fries instead. It's just how they operate. But let's move on. Next question.
Yeah, next question. If Mike and Lindsay were named the Bengals GM, what is the first order of business? Let's say we're going into the offseason, and I just want to take Ja'Marr Chase off the table because that's obviously easy softball answer. Ja'Marr Chase signed. What's next?
Mm-hmm. I would probably cut Hubbard this offseason. And if we're working together, we probably have to discuss it, but I'd be working on an extension for T. Higgins because I just think that's how the offense works. I think that's how the offense works. I'm tired of watching a very good but not elite player leave this team and then go play at very good to elite level somewhere else, and they're trying to replace him with guys who can't hang. I don't know. I'd rather just keep a guy that I drafted in the second round and he turned out to be really good.
All right. So I understand what you're saying. And since I'm part GM, I obviously love when T. Higgins is out there. This offense is fun. I'm spending money on Trey Smith. Believe it or not, the Cincinnati Bengals have money. They're only paying Joe Burrow when you look at some of these contracts. They get rid of Sam Hubbard, they save about $9.5 million, if not more. You put that money elsewhere, you put it to another player. You can still get T. Higgins done. You can still get Ja'Marr Chase done. It was terrible business because T. Higgins could have been done 2 years ago. Ja'Marr Chase could have been done, and they could have overlapped just a little bit, and that would have been done. But I'm bringing one interior player. Trey Smith, come on down. You're coming to Cincinnati. I mean, we are spending money. We are spending big money.
Yeah, as long as look, we're named GM. Does that mean that Mike Brown is actually going to spend guaranteed money like this? But
he gave it to us. He said,
will. Yeah, he gave us the guaranteed money. Yeah, he's like, I'm sick of this. Get us a good social media standing. Yeah, I would cut Hubbard, cut Rankins, sign Higgins to an extension, sign Chase to an extension, bring in Trey Smith, figure out a way to make that all work. If you have to cut somebody else like a Pratt or Gino, you make those cuts too. And you just save the money on guys who are playing below their contract and are already average players. They're playing bad. Cut those guys, save all the money you can, and go get high-end talent. Guys who make a difference. I think that's the big part. It's like, go find guys that actually make a difference on the football field.
Yeah, and real quick, just to kind of finish this out before we get to our next question. There are different ways teams operate in free agency. You see a lot of teams are like, let me just spend a bunch of money on a bunch of guys to say I paid all these guys and I spent a lot of money, and those teams don't always win. I agree with you. Give me the guys who have built that resume and they are good. They can produce. Spend the money that you have. The cap is only going to go up, and the Cincinnati Bengals have money, believe it or not, going into the offseason. And one thing, though, I have to ask you, Trey Hendrickson, he's going to want some more money.
And he's on a deal. He's still got a year.
You wouldn't trade him. You wouldn't trade him because you're not going to extend him and get more money, and he's going to be really upset. Would you just say, you know what? You're still playing on a deal? Maybe add a few more mil to his.
I'm not opposed to giving more money, but I would bring in other guys. That'd be my first order of business, to be as good as I can be next year, I think. Because either way, Trey will be on the team.
I agree with you. Next question. Would you want Karras playing guard and Matt Lee at center while Volson and Kappa and Ford compete for a spot?
Sure. I mean, like, as crappy as it is, Volson's their best run blocker. And Matt Lee, he looked okay in pass protection, but he did not look very good in run blocking in the preseason. He looked okay. There were flashes, but I don't think it looked very consistent. That was against, like, second, third, and practice squad players, second string, third string practice squad guys. So a little bit concerned about this making the run game even worse. But at the same time, in pass protection, it would help. I can't imagine it hurting because Karras at guard has got to be better than Volson or Kappa at this point. You've got number 1 and number 2 in pressures given up, and it looks like it on the field. So I'm not opposed to them finding a way to make one of the ways this offensive line could work into a little bit better. If I had to pick, I would pick a better pass protecting offensive line than a better run blocking one. So if we lose a little bit more in the run blocking, it already stinks. The passing game's good, so let's just make it even better.
I'm in. Sounds good. Next mailbag question. What coaching changes, including position coaches, would you like to see given the way the season went?
I think the defensive side needs a lot of new faces when you have a season this bad. I don't think anybody on the defensive line has developed, and when you do that, I think you have to point to Marion Hobby, even though he's well respected, and just go like, "Hey, this isn't working out." Probably move on for Lou Anarumo just because it feels like, yeah, his guys are causing him. He just hangs on to his guys, and he's very loyal to them, and it causes some issues, limiting snaps for guys who should be out there. I think the corner position would be the one. I don't know if I move on. Linebacker coach is like, why are these linebackers worse? But I don't know. Move on. I think offensively, I definitely keep Walters. I'm probably just keeping most of the offense. I'd probably move on from Pollock because even if I don't think he's the number one problem, I think there's a talent issue. You still can't. You haven't made it work in 4 years. I think it's time you go find somebody else. It can get worse. I remember Jim Turner, but it can get better too, for sure. And I'd also look at the running back coach just because, I mean, I don't know, maybe Chase Brown's playing better, but I thought like with the Zach Moss thing, I was like, I don't know. Is there something here with this running back coach? Like, is he improving these players? Chase Brown's playing pretty well right now, so that one might depend on how the season finishes. I'd probably keep the tight end coach too. I think he's doing good work over there. Do you have anybody I missed?
No, I feel like you hit on everybody that I'd want to keep. And the thing I think about Troy Walters is another team plucking him because he has had several interviews, or at least they've had interest in him for offensive coordinator positions, and seeing how some of these offensive coordinators, you can look at Detroit, you can even look at the Texans, even though their offense is struggling a little bit this year. And I think that they would take him and he would get promoted to an offensive coordinator position around the league. Just with, I know it's T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and who knows with Jermaine Burton and Yoshi and the rest of the wide receiver room, but he's still really good at his job and what he's been able to get from those guys. So I think that there is really an opportunity that this could be the last year with Troy in the wide receiver room. So that's definitely something to watch. But that
could also be pitcher leads for a head coach job, and they just promote him to offensive coordinator at the Bengals.
Yeah. He hopefully pitcher stays and Troy stays. I think that those would be the two that I'm like definitely stay. When it comes to defensive line and offensive line, you got to move on.
Yeah.
Next question. If you can make 3 personnel changes for the last 6 games, what would they be? I know we kind of talked a little bit about it, but Mike?
I would put Murphy in over Hubbard. I would look into getting Battle on the field instead of Stone or Bell. Don't really care which. Probably Bell, I guess. Because Stone, in theory, it's still there, playmaking. They need somebody who can make some plays on the back end of this defense. And I think the third one would be to put Matt Lee in there and just see what he has. I mean, you draft all these young guys. Yeah, I know he's a 7th rounder, but to me, it can't get worse. And you're at the point in the season where you're desperate and you're almost at the point where you're completely knocked out. I want to see what the young guys have so that you're not going into a Dax Hill situation where you're hitting their 5th-year option and you go, I don't know. I have no idea if I would accept this 5th-year option. It's a steal if he's a good corner, but I don't know if he's a good corner because it was 3 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it was with him out there.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think when I look at the defensive side of the ball, maybe a little bit more reps on the field for DJ Ivy. Again, a guy who's young. We got to see what he is, and not like he was a 1st or 2nd round pick or anything like that, but I would like to see what he could do on the defensive side. Probably will have opportunity with all the injuries that they currently have at cornerback. And I'm getting this name a lot, and I know we did have it in our Twitter questions, so I apologize, Spencer, if it's one of our questions coming up. But Tyson Anderson is one of their number 1 special teams guys, and Darren Simmons might say he is off limits. He's on our special teams. We really need him. He honestly should be a Pro Bowler, but I'd like to see a little more of him, possibly on the defensive side of the ball. And Akeem Davis Gaither, just let me see. I want Akeem to be extended. To be honest with you, with the way some of the linebackers are playing, I think that that would just be such a smart idea. And I don't know if he'll come back for another 1 year deal, but we'll see. There's still a lot of youth on the defensive side of the ball. I agree with you, Lou Anarumo. Look, I love what Lou did to the defensive side of the ball, but when it comes to his players, he doesn't know how to say goodbye unless it's Cam Taylor-Britt. Cam Taylor-Britt's been benched a couple times end game. I feel like you can go back to the Panthers game for a few series, and then obviously this past game on Sunday Night Football, but I don't need to see Sam Hubbard out there. You already mentioned it. We've talked about it plenty. Defensively, I feel like you see more of your youth and what I'd like to see. I just don't see them making any changes really on the offensive line, even though we did talk about it in our previous segment. Next question.
Yeah.
Next final question. Oh, Tyson Anderson. Sorry, I apologize. I know I threw a lot of questions over to our producer earlier. We've talked about Myles Murphy and Sam Hubbard, just kind of a summary for that. We haven't really mentioned Tyson. I think maybe before the season started when it comes to the safety room, what that could possibly look like, just as another name because of how bad safety play was last year, and it's still really bad this year. Do you see him getting any reps on defense versus, him being a special teams kind of guy?
Not really. I think they've had opportunities with Tyson Anderson in there before, and they haven't. I don't know. Must just be something at practice. They don't think that he is a secretly good safety. I think they put Dejon Anthony in before him if they were going to put a safety in there because they put Anthony on the field on defense a little bit. Why is just he was a day 3 guy that got drafted, highly athletic, but he's never really seen the field on defense other than the preseason. And the preseason, it's a mirage, man. It's not always showing you exactly what's going on. Like Dax Hill looked like a very good safety in the preseason. That didn't translate. And that could be exactly what we're looking at with Anderson when he does well in the preseason. Why not give Myles Murphy more snaps and limit Sam Hubbard's? And to me, that's just Lou loves Sam. And that I don't agree with it. He's playing worse. I think his last game was one of the worst games I've seen from a defensive end in general, but that I think he just has a big blind spot for him. So he just thinks Myles Murphy and Justice are competing for the third end job instead of them having a shot at taking that second end job, which they should.
I'm going to say one thing about Sam Hubbard, and I know we've talked about him honestly on the last probably 3 episodes. I keep seeing these interviews that Sam, he's playing hurt or he played hurt going into the season. And obviously he wanted to help his team, but right now he's hurting his team. And I don't know why, as a team and an organization, and this could be Lou and Ramo, this could be Zach Taylor, this could be the front office, why somebody's not just saying, okay, you know what, it would benefit if we put him on the IR. He needs to heal, or maybe a season's over and you need to see what you have in Myles Murphy. I'm not out here to say that Myles Murphy is going to be some kind of all-star on the defensive side. I'm here to say, I want to know what Myles Murphy is. He's a first-round draft pick, and I still don't even know what he's going to do for this defensive side of the ball. He was coming off an injury. He's had few reps when he is out there. He's not getting enough on the rotation. Let me see what it is so I know what they're going to do going forward so they know if they need to get another guy on their team in the offseason because it's a huge question mark what he is. We could say the same thing that, when you mentioned Dax Hill. We still don't know Dax Hill's full potential, but Myles Murphy will be going into year 3 and we're going to be clueless about it. Look at other teams. Look at their playmakers out there. You can look at the Philadelphia Eagles. Look at the Kansas City Chiefs. We know what their first-round picks can do on the defensive side of the ball. I don't know. And it's absolutely terrible. And that's a lot on the coaching too, because we've said it. You have to coach and develop some of your youth on the defense side of the ball, and they haven't. They failed it. That's an F for failure for what we've seen on defense. So I don't know what Myles Murphy is.
Yeah, the Myles Murphy thing could be crazy in that, let's say he finishes out this year strong even, and you go, oh, I don't know, something like 4 sacks over his last whatever games or just something like that. And you're like, oh, like maybe he should be a starter. And then maybe you plan for him to be the starting end next year and he blows out his knee in game 2. Well, now you hit year 4 and you don't know if you take that 5th-year option. So that's where I think you have to play him. You should have been playing him earlier, but you have to play him to figure it out. Or maybe year 3, it just could be a Dax Hill situation because you have that 5th-year option. You have to make that decision before year 4 starts. You don't make that decision before year 5 starts. So by the end of year 3, you need to know what this player is so that you know if you can take that option or not, because it's going to save you money if you do take it and they're a good player. But if they're not a good player, you obviously decline it because it is more money than they're making, and you don't want to pay $10 million for a guy who's a below average starter or a role player. Don't want to do that. But yeah, it drives me a little bit nuts to just be like, oh yeah, they'll just play him next year. Sam Hubbard still has a contract next year. That is terrifying to me that they could just do this again next year where he's not getting enough snaps that you can make a good evaluation. And then year 4, they'll finally start him. I don't know. It's tough. And you don't want to waste more first round picks if he's going to end up being good. It's just roster mismanagement to me. When you drafted him, that should have been the sign that Hubbard will be out of here within 2 years, but it didn't happen. Or at least that he's just becoming a role player. He's not a role player. He's still a starter.
I'm going to make a real quick point and then we'll wrap up this podcast. The problem I have is there are other position groups in the rookie class who are playing on the offensive side of the ball, but you have a problem playing your guy who's in year 2 towards the end of the season. Like that is so, and that for me, the only thing I can point at is the person who's putting the players in the game. And that's the defensive coordinator. Sorry, Lou. Stop playing your friends and play your players. I mean, I'm sorry.
The Sam Hubbard thing should be just like a one of those, like in my movie. Can't think of the name right now. Goodfellas, like in Goodfellas, when Joe Pesci's walking into the room, that should be what Sam Hubbard's getting. But like with going to IR, he's just like, "Hey, can you come into my office?" He's just walking in, they're happy. And instead of killing him, you just go like, "You're going on IR for this hamstring." Like, sorry. And that's the nice way of not cutting somebody and ruining their season or benching him and hurting his ego. You just go, let's make sure you're healthy. Let's put you on IR.
They should have done that, and that was a fail. But we'll see. We'll talk plenty going into next week about the Cincinnati Bengals and the Pittsburgh Steelers as they get back from the bye week. Mike, are you taking a week off on Bengals talk, or do you have something coming up?
I don't have anything right now. I did take a week off. I was watching the Lions to feel something good. I don't like to watch them on broadcast live, like on TV normally, because they just win 52-6. But I do like watching their film because I'm like, okay, this is like one of the best units, right? And now I watch them. Weird hot take is just, I think Ben Johnson is really good, but the one area that I'm a little bit underwhelmed is his true drop back pass stuff. I was like, oh, this is it. Like, I think the Bengals have a better drop back passing game than this, and this is like the best defensive mind. But I also think he's way better at running the ball and play action stuff. But it's just a little bit surprising. And maybe it's Goff. Maybe it's just like they don't want Goff really throwing that stuff. But that is important to this offense. If there is like the dream of a Ben Johnson hire somehow, I'd be fully in. I'm not saying that, but I am just going like, I don't know if this is for sure an A+.
Jahmyr Gibbs did that interview last week. Didn't really help. Kind of a stab to the heart. Could have been a Bengal if he would have if they would have traded up to get him, but the Lions took him off the board.
I don't know. That's crazy. Like
he'd be playing, Mike.
If they were trading up, why wouldn't they trade up other times? They're going to trade up for a running back of all things. They're not going to trade up for Tavondre Sweat or Johnny Newton. They're not going to trade up to go get an offensive tackle. No, they'll just trade up to go get a running back. That would be insane. They never trade up. He would be playing, but they never trade up. Like, that's the crazy part to me. Or like go trade up to go get one of the corners or something. But no, instead they would trade up to go get that running back and nobody else. Okay.
This is why they need us to be GM. We have it all figured out in the offseason. Spend the money. We'll see if it happens. Right. But yeah, I'm looking forward to stress-free football coming up this weekend. Make sure you follow Mike Bengals_Sands over on Twitter. You can follow me at Lindsay Patterson. Thank you for listening during the bye week. It's always game day in Cincinnati.